ถานการณ์ของประเทศไทยขณะนี้ปฏิเสธไม่ได้นะคะว่าเป็นที่จับตามองอย่างมากทั้งในเวทีระดับอาเซียนและระดับโลกค่ะในโอกาสที่ TMA ได้เชิญนักคิดระดับโลกมาพูดคุยมาบรรยายให้กับนักธุรกิจในไทยได้รับฟังถึงการปรับปรุงความสามารถในการแข่งขันของประเทศเป็นโอกาสที่ดีนะคะที่วันนี้ดิฉันจะได้คุยกับ Professor กิชอร์ มาบูบานีค่ะคณบดีนโยบายสาธารณะนะคะแห่งมหาวิทยาลัยแห่งชาติสิงคโปร์ค่ะ Thank you Professor for joining me.
My pleasure.
And for you to come to Thailand at this point. I wonder how do you assess the outlook of Thailand in ASEAN after the coup?
Well, I think everybody in Southeast Asia wants Thailand to succeed. Everybody in Southeast Asia wants Thailand to stabilize. So if the coup has helped Thailand to stabilize, I think that's good news for Southeast Asia too. Because, you know, Thailand is a very critical country within the ASEAN family. It's one of the founding members. I think you have one of the largest economies within the ASEAN family. And you've always been a driving force for opening up ASEAN too. So in that sense, a strong and confident Thailand is good for ASEAN.
It seems Western countries think differently. They do not see the coup as very welcoming prospect for Thailand.
Well, I mean, you see, the sad part about the West today is that Western civilization used to be among the most open and critical civilizations, but the West has become very ideological. So they have certain formulas, and you must conform to the formula. So at the end of the Cold War, the West said, hey, only democracies will succeed, and non-democracies like China will fail.
That's their strong argument.
Guess what? In the last 25 years, the opposite has happened. A non-democratic government like China has provided the most successful upliftment of human standards, and many Western countries today are struggling, even though they're democratic. So it shows to you that it is, we should not rely on the judgments of the West anymore, that they have in some ways lost touch with reality.
So in that case, should they be more practical and tell Thailand that they support what has happened in Thailand?
No, I think what they should do is to have an open mind and not pass judgment on the basis of abstract principles. They should look at the real situation in Thailand. They should ask themselves, are the people in Thailand better off today than they were a few weeks ago? And if they're better off today, they should acknowledge that people are better off today, instead of saying, no, you must follow a certain formula.
But they really stick to their gun in terms of saying that Thailand should get back to democracy, Thailand should have election, Thailand should protect human rights and freedom of expression. How should Thailand respond to those arguments?
Well, I think number one, I would tell Thailand not to get too aggravated with them, because I think we all agree, Thailand has also said it will go back to elections, it will go back to all that. That's not the question at all. The question is when and how. And surely Thailand is in a better position to decide when and how to do so than for the West to do so. Because the West, unfortunately, I'll give you an example. At the end of the Cold War, the West strongly advised Yugoslavia to go democratic. And guess what happened? There was a civil war in Yugoslavia. People killed each other. And when that happened, the West took no responsibility and washed its hands off and walked away. Now that's morally irresponsible. If you advise a country to do something, and if things go wrong, you are responsible. So the West has had a track record of giving advice, but not accepting responsibility for their actions. So I would say Thailand should not be too aggravated by these Western criticisms, because they are made unthinkingly, without looking at the real situation, and without assuming the responsibility.
Looking at Thailand at the moment, what have concerned you the most? about the political situation in the country?
Well, I think it will be all the fellow Southeast Asian countries of Thailand in the ASEAN community would, I think, be happy if Thailand becomes more stable and predictable politically. As you know, you've had some very difficult years recently, and I think it would be good if you could have what I called a culture of consultation and consensus among all the different parties in Thailand who will continue to retain their political disagreements, but while retaining their political disagreements, they would say, but still, let us agree on keeping Thailand stable politically.
But it's very difficult to do it in practice, to really listen from different opinions and having
Yes,
consensus.
it is difficult, but it has been done. It has been done. Remember, I read an article in The Nation today by the former Prime Minister, Mr. Anand Panyarakun. He's a friend of mine because he used to serve in the Thai Foreign Service and I used to serve in the Singapore Foreign Service. And I admire him, and I like the article that he wrote about Nelson Mandela and South Africa. And believe me, your divisions in Thailand are much less difficult than the divisions between the blacks and the whites in South Africa. The blacks in South Africa were suppressed by the whites for over 100 years or more. The bitterness in South Africa was far deeper than the bitterness in Thailand. And yet, Nelson Mandela achieved reconciliation and achieved consensus in South Africa. So it can be done. So, but it does require, of course, leadership. It does require a certain magnanimity of spirit. It does require a willingness to put aside short-term interests for long-term interests of the country.
What if Thai people do not really optimistic, just like what you are saying? We just feel like, oh, it's very difficult situation, very like challenging transitional period in Thailand at the moment.
Yes, well, I think it would help if everyone agrees to stay calm and have a, they have something called a cooling off period. And quite often in many countries, like in Indonesia, you had a cooling off period before the elections. So, you've had some difficult years, have maybe a year or two of a cooling off period, and then you can slowly resume the normal political activity, but hopefully by then the tempest would have subsided, and then you can carry on.
For Thailand's position in ASEAN, do you think if Thailand cannot really get back on track in 1 year, 2 years, are we going to lose leading position in ASEAN? Right now we are the second largest economy in ASEAN.
Well, I think I would certainly agree with you that as the other ASEAN countries become more competitive, it is possible that they may become more competitive than Thailand. So I think that's why I say there should be at least a consensus in Thailand that the political disagreements, which will remain, which will not go away, should not interfere with the economic growth and development of Thailand. So, I mean, for example, you need to have an airport functioning 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So you agree that airports must be left alone, for example. I mean, that's just one
You mean
example.
the protest shouldn't take place at the airport?
I mean, any country that shuts down its airport becomes uncompetitive. That's a fact.
Even though it's a short period of time?
Oh, even though it's a short period of time. So you can agree on some of these things, it doesn't mean that your political differences disappear, they remain. But you say that they should not upset the economic competitiveness of Thailand. And you know, the other ASEAN countries, I think Indonesia, under the leadership of the new President Jokowi, is going to do very well.
Why?
I spent, on December 18th, I was invited to spend 7 hours with the then Governor Jokowi, and I went around Jakarta with him in his car, and I observed how popular he is on the ground. I observe how effective he is in terms of tackling problems. He's very interested in improving the logistics of Indonesia, because you know he's a former furniture manufacturer and exporter. He used to export furniture from Java to Europe and America, so he understands the importance of logistics. So if Indonesia opens up and becomes more competitive, then the competition for Thailand will become stronger.
But do you think the transition in Indonesia will be smooth? Because you can see Prabowo, the competitor, does not quite want to surrender to the election result, and he wants to challenge it.
Well, I mean, I can understand why General Prabowo may want to challenge the results, but I think a consensus has developed in Indonesia that it's time to move on. And it is interesting that his vice presidential candidate, Mr. Hatta, did not join General Prabowo's protest. So I think after tempers cool down, I expect Indonesia to progress very smoothly.
How has political stability in Indonesia or in Thailand matter for ASEAN community?
Oh, I think since Indonesia and Thailand are two of the largest economies within ASEAN, it matters a great deal how Indonesia and Thailand do. So the fact that Indonesia now has a strong leader who can push for economic reforms, and I hope in some ways, he may not open up the Indonesian economy a lot, but if he opens it up in some ways, improves its logistics, improves its competitiveness, it'll be good for ASEAN. Because, you know, remember that ASEAN has to compete with China, which is now led by a strong and capable leader called Xi Jinping, and ASEAN has to compete with India, which now has a strong and capable leader, Mr. Modi. So if we don't keep pace with the two of them, we'll be left behind.
Should we think of competing with them or befriending with them, with China and India? What should be position of ASEAN?
I think, you know, economic competition takes place not among enemies. Economic competition takes place among friends. So it's not a zero-sum game. And when there's economic competition, China and India will benefit in some areas, and we will benefit in other areas. But that is if we become competitive. But if they become if China and India become more competitive and we become less competitive, then we will suffer. So we must keep up the same level of competitiveness as China and India.
But what if among ASEAN countries, South China Sea issue is still matter a lot, and it divide ASEAN countries?
I think the South China Sea issue is not dividing the ASEAN countries as much as it is a cause of division within China and ASEAN. As you know, in July 2012, when the ASEAN ministers met in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, for the first time in 45 years, ASEAN failed to agree to a joint communique because China was trying to persuade Cambodia not to include a reference to South China Sea, which was unacceptable to the other ASEAN states. And I think China made a strategic mistake in that venture, because it is in China's national interest to keep ASEAN together rather than to divide ASEAN. So the
Do you
South
think
China
so? Do you really believe so, that
oh yes,
ASEAN
because
countries will stick
a
together?
divided, see, China's number one worry has to be that someday the United States may wake up and decide to have a containment policy of China similar to the containment policy that the United States successfully deployed against the Soviet Union. And so the best way to avoid a containment policy is to develop close relations with its neighbors, and especially develop close relations with ASEAN, because a strong, stable ASEAN will be a buffer and cannot be used by the United States to contain China. So it is, I'm appealing to China's national interests. And I think the Chinese realize that it is in their national interest to do this. So I'm actually quite confident that China will now be much more careful in its handling of the South China Sea issue. I can understand why it's in the interest of the Western media to blow up the issue of South China Sea. But it's not in the interest of the ASEAN countries to do so. So I think we should work with China to calm the waters in South China Sea.
And what should be the take of ASEAN position in terms of balancing between China and the US?
Well, I think it's clear that if, we are very fortunate, normally when you have the relations between the number one power in the world and the number one emerging power in the world, and when the number one emerging power is about to pass the number one power in the world, there should be rising levels of tension within China and the United States. Amazingly, there are no rising levels of tension. And that's good for us. So we should thank both Washington DC and Beijing for keeping their relations on an even keel, and that is what serves ASEAN's interests. But if the worst case scenario happens, if indeed relations between US and China become more difficult, then it's important for ASEAN not to take sides.
You don't see any tension between China and the US at the moment, even though the term China threat has been using?
Yes, there are, of course, there are some areas there are many areas of geopolitical rivalry, and there will always be geopolitical rivalry between China and the United States, Russia and the United States, Europe and Russia. That geopolitical rivalry is normal. That will continue. But it's a different thing when rivalry leads to conflict or tension. Today we have the rivalry, but not the conflict or tension, and that's good. But if it goes to a negative side, then we should be worried.
Do you see any factor that will lead to tension between those leading powers?
In fact, since the current situation of lack of tension is normal, I wouldn't be surprised if there's tension that will emerge from United States and China. But I must say that this is where, if the ASEAN countries have any role to play, they should encourage the US and China to attend all the ASEAN-related meetings, the East Asian Summit, the ASEAN Regional Forum, and persuade the United States and China to work together in the region instead of engaging in zero-sum competition.
Looking at ASEAN itself, why are you so confident in the future of ASEAN?
I am a great believer in ASEAN because, I serve as ambassador to the UN for over 10 years. I have studied every region in the world, and there is no region in the world as amazing as ASEAN.
You must be biased because you are from ASEAN,
no,
from Southeast Asia.
I am an objective social scientist. And let me explain why. There is no other region on our planet which is as diverse as ASEAN. Among the 600 million people, you have 250 million Muslims, 100 million Christians, 180 million Hinayana Buddhists, 80 million Mahayana Buddhists, you have Taoists, you have Confucianists, and you even have communists. And in this most diverse region on the planet, we have achieved peace and harmony. That's a remarkable achievement. So we have laid the foundations for stronger growth moving ahead. And with the center of gravity of the world's economy moving to our part of the world, ASEAN is strategically positioned to take advantage of this new economic growth. And so if we go ahead next year and successfully implement the ASEAN Economic Community in 2015, we would then be well positioned to take advantage of the new opportunities coming our way. The center of gravity of the world's economy is not moving to South America. The center of gravity of the world's economy is not moving to Africa. It's moving to Southeast Asia.
And what should ASEAN people do to take that advantage?
Well, the ASEAN country, I think the ASEAN people, the tragedy about ASEAN is that it has been so far a project of cooperation among ASEAN governments and not yet a project of cooperation among the ASEAN people.
But it's one of the pillars of ASEAN.
Yes, but I think we need the people of ASEAN need to get me more engaged. And this more, when I spoke to the Thai Management Association, I said the time has come for the ASEAN business communities to play a bigger role in fostering ASEAN cooperation, especially play a bigger role in ensuring that the ASEAN countries implement the agreements reached in the ASEAN Economic Community in 2015.
What should be the role of the governments to foster cooperation among ASEAN countries?
I think, to be fair, the ASEAN governments have done a very good job, and they have actually spelled out some ambitious goals in 2015. You know, the ASEAN Economic Community, ASEAN Security Community, ASEAN Social Political Community. Now, having set out these ambitious goals, you now have to start implementing them.
By business community?
By the governments, by the business communities, by the people, we all must implement these ambitious goals. So 2015 will open a new window for ASEAN, and we must make full use of this window to ensure that we become strong and competitive in the next 5 years.
Do you think people in ASEAN countries are aware enough of huge potential as you see it?
Sadly, they are not aware enough of the huge potential, because too many people in ASEAN and too many journalists in ASEAN read all the negative Western coverage on ASEAN and begin to believe it. And that's unfortunate. And I wish that the ASEAN journalists would develop greater courage and independence and tell the Western media, you've got ASEAN all wrong.
Are you telling me too?
No, I'm encouraging you to tell your audience in Thailand not to underestimate what ASEAN can do. In fact, I have said in one of my columns that ASEAN deserves the Nobel Peace Prize, because ASEAN has developed peace among 600 million people in the most diverse region of the world. Believe me, if the people in the Balkans in Europe could follow ASEAN, they'll be much better off. If the people in the Middle East could follow ASEAN, they'll be much better off. If the people in South Asia, between India and Pakistan, could follow ASEAN's example, they'll be much better off. We are so far ahead of many of these regions, and the world hasn't recognized it.
Why is that?
Because of Western arrogance. The Western media continues to write negative stories on ASEAN, and they see the glass as half empty and not half full. So we must tell them the story that ASEAN is half full and not half empty.
Do you think is it something to do with ASEAN way or non-interference principle among ASEAN leaders that may make it so questionable among Western press or the media in general?
Well, I think I'm actually very happy that ASEAN has developed the principle of non-interference in internal affairs, because that's the reason why ASEAN is at peace. Because can you imagine if Thailand had been going through when Thailand was going through all its political difficulties, if say Myanmar or Cambodia, your neighbors, had come to Thailand and say, hey, you are doing wrong, you should do A, B, C, D. Thailand would reply, please mind your own business, take care of your countries, don't give me advice. And that's a good practice in ASEAN. We let each country work out its own problems. And I think the West also is realizing that it is not so easy to give advice and then follow through. For example, the United States 3 years ago said, President Assad, you must step down. 3 years has gone by. He has not stepped down. What are you going to do about it? Right? What was the purpose of asking him to step down? What did you achieve? Right? So this is why the West should learn from ASEAN, be cautious about interfering in the affairs of other countries.
But ASEAN nearly did that to Thailand at one point during the meeting, and they have issued a letter to tell the community that they are quite concerned with the political situation in Thailand.
Yeah, I think expressions of concern are reasonable. We have ASEAN has expressed concern over developments in Myanmar before. ASEAN has expressed concern over developments in East Timor before. ASEAN has expressed concern, I think, also over the problems in Cambodia in the early 1990s. So it's perfectly normal. So that's okay. But don't interfere. Don't try to get involved, because you can't get involved from the outside.
So you really believe in the future of ASEAN?
I am absolutely confident. And so far, I have been writing about the return of Asia for 25 years. And everything that I have said has come true. So that's why I am confident that what I say about ASEAN will also come true. There will be difficulties. There will be challenges, but we are heading in the right direction.
When will be golden era of ASEAN?
Oh, I think the golden era of ASEAN is just beginning. And I would say the next 50 to 100 years provides enormous opportunities for ASEAN. I'll give you one simple example. The total size of the Asian middle class, right, from West Asia to East Asia, in 2010 was 500 million people, big number. By 2020, 6 years from now, that number is going to explode from 500 million to 1.75 billion people, 3.5 times. This large middle class will want to travel and see the world and do something new. And you know that which is the corner of the planet which is the culturally most diverse and also one of the most hospitable corners of the planet? That's Southeast Asia and ASEAN. So we can have benefit tremendously from this enormous explosion of middle classes. So that's why I say the golden age of ASEAN is coming.
Thank you very much, Professor, for joining me in this program.
My pleasure. Real pleasure to speak to you, and I hope we meet again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
มุมมองจากศาสตราจารย์คิชอร์มาบูบานีนะคะนักคิดระดับโลกกับมุมมองที่เต็มไปด้วยความหวังและโอกาสที่จะเกิดขึ้นสำหรับประเทศอาเซียนนะคะแน่นอนสำหรับประเทศไทยเองก็มีโอกาสที่ดีรออยู่อีกมากแต่ว่าจะต้องผ่านกระบวนการทั้งการปฏิรูปการทำให้ประเทศเดินหน้าไปสู่ทิศทางที่จะเพิ่มความสามารถในการแข่งขันของประเทศต่อไปค่ะและทั้งหมดคือตอบโจทย์และที่นี่ไทย PBS สำหรับคืนนี้ค่ะดิฉันณัฐฐา โกมลวาทินสวัสดีค่ะ